Welcome to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling. You are about to discover impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you, so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Be sure you visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now tune in, get ready, and enjoy the journey of emerging as a leader of exception in the 21st century.
Welcome, everyone, to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Vicki Noethling, coming to you from Roswell, Georgia. The goal of this podcast is to bring topics and guests that will empower you to become that confident leader and take your business and your life to the next level. Today, I am very pleased to have with me Logan Hufford. And let me talk to you a little bit about Logan's background. He is a born and raised Alaskan. Oh, yes, I have now interviewed two people who have been born in Alaska and are still there. Married to a gorgeous bride named Carrie, who herself is a fourth generation Alaskan, and together they are raising four amazing, crazy little monkeys. Their life is a simple one. They love their family time, their dogs, and exploring the beautiful Alaskan wilderness. And yet, absolutely none of this should be possible today. For years, Logan did just about everything in his power to destroy his marriage and his life. Logan was a raging sex addict, porn affairs, hiring prostitutes, and more had simply become a way of his life. So he thought he had no hope. In 2016, God began to change all that. Through recovery, God transformed Logan's life and his marriage. Logan and his wife Carrie each now lead recovery groups, doing what they can to give back by sharing the gifts that God has given them. So today we're going to talk about something that I'm sure was part of the recovery as well, and that's building healthy habits. So please join me in welcoming my guest, Logan Hufford. Logan, I am very happy to have you as a guest today so we can talk about this because, when we talk about finding your confidence, there's a lot of things in our lives that take away our confidence. And it's not just being afraid to speak in public, as I train, and it's not just having a terrible manager that's not giving us any accolades that we need to grow as a leader. There are a lot of other things that can keep us from growing. So before we get into the topic of building healthy habits, I have two questions I always ask, very simple questions. The first one's a short answer. Just tell everybody, where do you live? Are you still in Alaska?
Yep, I live in Wasilla. Or sometimes
I've heard of
as
that.
the valley. So it's about an hour north of Anchorage.
Mm-hmm. I have heard of that. I think my husband's grandfather actually went up and stayed there on his fishing expeditions.
Okay.
That name just sounds so familiar. I think so.
Yeah.
So let's take a few moments for you to share what this journey was like. That really demonstrates that pivotal moment that you said, no, things have to change. And I know, you were inspired by God, but it has to be you hit that rock bottom, that finally God's voice got through that stubborn head of yours and said, no, I am listening, Lord, and show me the way. So share your journey with us a little bit.
Yeah. The way I think about it is there were landmarks that God started to put landmarks in my life. Things started to happen differently.
Yeah.
First and foremost, and of course I'm giving like the super zoomed out version.
Super.
Folks, there's, you can reach out if you want to hear more. It's all on my Instagram and stuff. I put it all out there, but it's at years of what started with porn addiction, which then graduated into playing that out in real life, becoming a predator. I don't back down from that word. That's what I was. I trained myself to take what I could get from basically any woman in my path, and sexual affairs became part of that, a huge part of that. Just sexually objectifying and getting what I could get from anyone in front of me, essentially, including prostitutes and phone sex and all of that. And my life was a living hell, and all of this was while I was married. Almost all of this was with kids. We had little babies at home. We have 4 boys, all born within 5 years.
Wow.
And all four boys were born before I got sober. So, I mean, it was a complete nightmare situation. And one of those first landmarks was summer of 2015. I had confessed things to my wife, to Carrie. I had confessed that I'd been sexually unfaithful. Of course, she's raising kids. She's in survival mode. She's a stay-at-home mom. She's trying to take care of the kids. So nobody should have to be prepared for that kind of news, right? But she definitely did not know how to respond to that in a healthy way. But in summer of 2015, she gave me an ultimatum. She finally stood up to her abuser and said, I can't control you, but if you continue to have affairs, then you will lose me and you'll lose the boys. I still really struggled to get traction. It was almost a year before my sobriety date. I didn't have another sexual affair, but still struggled with porn, and just, healthy habits were still not really a part of my infrastructure. But I started to do some things. I started to attend some meetings, reach out to people. And so that first landmark of ultimatum from my wife, who had never given me an ultimatum before, who, didn't know how to respond, right? Hadn't really responded with anything other than trying to love me more, trying to be a better wife. Because of course she would tell you now, she thought it was about her, right? That I was cheating on
I was
her.
just going to say, I'm sure she just thought, what am I not doing?
Right. Super common feeling, a natural feeling, I think, for anyone who's been betrayed, right? Is, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? And it wasn't. It was I had trained myself to chase after the high that I would get from chasing new and different. She couldn't compete with that.
Right.
And finally, May 19th, 2016 is my sobriety date. In 2016, March is actually the first time I went to a prodigals meeting. And that is a group, you talk about healthy habits, they're all about that. Now, it's a Christ-based recovery group. So, Christ is at the center, relationship with Christ is at the center of that. But it's a beautiful marriage of spiritual aspect. And also, it's not just pray more. It's not just let's read more Bible verses about, sexual sin and what can we learn from that. It's like it involves that, but it's also, what concrete, tangible things are we doing differently? How can I change the infrastructure of my life, of my decision-making process? What does that look like? Opening it up to feedback from guys. That's actually one of the huge differences between prodigals and most recovery groups. And I love recovery. I have a huge, my life is all about recovery. But most recovery groups care so much about safety that they end up exchanging safety for a comfort zone. And it becomes this place where they want me to feel safe. So then guys aren't allowed to give me feedback. They're not allowed to ask me tough questions and get in my face and grill me, because they don't want to offend me or hurt my feelings or scare me away. Well, I was a manipulator. I was a sociopath. I had huge narcissistic issues. I didn't need a comfort zone. I needed people to get in my face and say, what are you going to be doing differently? What will that look like? And what will you do if you fall off that path? Of course, all the while loving me, and standing in the gap for me and being in the trenches with me. But I needed that. I needed those guys to really hold me accountable, which was not comfortable a lot of the time. Not at all.
Yeah, I can't imagine it would be.
Yeah.
Wow.
In some ways, I say this a lot and it might sound kind of crazy, but I mean it with all sincerity. I'm thankful. I'm not thankful for what I did, but I am thankful for the fact that I had to go to recovery, the fact that I had that addiction, because the stakes were so freaking high that once I got that ultimatum, once I saw that, okay, there's actually a group that has guys that have healthy living, like I didn't fathom that was possible. Once I saw that, I had no excuses.
Yeah.
I'm okay. I don't know what these guys did to get years of healthy living after they had my type of life, but I'm willing to try it. And
Yeah.
like the stakes were so high that I had to form healthy habits, or else I'd lose my wife, lose my kids.
So as you're saying that, I was wondering if in that beginning stages before you found the prodigal sons, if you thought, well, I can't change. This is who I am. And having that desperation that if they don't have the answers, how much am I going to lose? If they didn't have the answers, gosh, would you really even want to live anymore if you didn't have your sons?
Vicki, I had no hope for years.
Yeah.
Went through some stages. Pretty early on in marriage. I mean, because I had cheated on my wife when we said I do. I'd already cheated on her. Within the first year of marriage, I cheated on her again. At that point, every time I would cheat on her, every time I would have an affair, I would think to myself, at least for a moment, for a day, for a month, for a few months, I'm never going to do it again. This is the worst thing. I'm terrible. I'll never do that again. And that continued for maybe a couple of years. After a couple of years of that, I completely gave up, and I'm like, I can't change. I will just continue to do this. I remember literally having thoughts with myself of just, I wonder how many more years before she leaves me. I wonder how many more years I'll get to have with my boys. I wonder how many more years until something even more happens, fill in the blank on what that could look like.
Yeah.
I mean, I always have believed in the existence of God. I've always believed that. And I've always known my Bible pretty well. So I'm always like, okay, well, obviously I'm not a Christian the way I'm living. There's no way.
Yeah.
And I remember just like crying out to God, like, why would you create me when all I do is hurt people? I mean, I hated my existence. Hated. I mean, this is something that hits me hard when I think about it every time. I hated that I was a dad because I hated that those boys had me.
Yeah.
That's a really dark place to live, but that's where I lived for years.
So if addiction is defined as something I can quit on my own, that doesn't mean you're not taking responsibility for your choices. I mean, and I don't think addiction is, if you don't, it's a behavior change. And if I can talk till I'm blue in the face to tell you should change, that this isn't healthy for you, that you need to bring on these healthy habits, but you have to feel that. You have to believe that if you don't, all is lost.
Yeah. And that has to be coupled with a hope that there is a possibility for change. Because again, for a long time, there was no hope. But those two things, believing to some extent that I'm powerless to control my addiction, which is, of course, that's part of the 12 steps, right? Recognizing that I'm powerless. I mean, I hated that verbiage before recovery. I always thought that was such a cop-out. Like, if you're an alcoholic, just don't go to the liquor store. What's so hard about that? If you're addicted to smoking, don't pick up a cigarette. Like, what's the big, like, how can you not control that? And there is truth to the statements I just made. Yeah, you shouldn't be doing those things. What I didn't realize until I was, in the thick of my own addiction is that juxtaposition of, I am responsible for my choices. I mean, I don't ever blame like the disease of addiction. I don't I don't buy that.
Right.
It's my addiction didn't hurt people. I hurt people. My addiction didn't make me cheat on my wife. I cheated on my wife. My addiction didn't look at porn. I did. But it's also true that I got myself so stuck in this cycle where literally I had rewired my brain in a very destructive way.
Yeah.
That I chased after these dopamine hits. I chased after these things. I was Pavlov's dog, X-rated version. I mean, that's what it was. And so it on one hand, I don't ever take away ownership of the fact that I made those choices and I take responsibility, but there was not an off button that I could just hit.
Yeah.
I mean, for years, again, believing in God, like I remember asking God to please just like take this away from me. Like, just, can you just make it so that I don't want it? I emphasize now, I didn't really want healing, because healing takes time and takes work, right? I just wanted God to like just change me, just
stop it,
take away that
yes.
part of my brain, right?
That's right.
I think about it like this. In my addiction, it felt like I'm in this self-driving car and I can't control it. I can't steer. I can't touch the brakes. I can't choose where I'm going. I'm just going 100 miles an hour down the highway, and it's freaking scary. That's truly what it felt like. And sometimes the scenery would be a little bit better than others. I wasn't always having affairs. I wasn't always looking at porn. Sometimes the car would slow down a little bit, but I couldn't choose what was happening, really, is what it felt like. Well, recovery, learning healthy habits, having healthy people around me, what that's done is it's allowed me to, watch the tape, so to speak, watching the film of, okay, now I'm watching that car and I realize, number one, I was driving it, absolutely, but it slows that down and it helps me see all these times where there was off ramps available. All these opportunities that I could have stopped the car, I could have gotten out of the car, I could have chosen a different path. And in my addiction, it just felt like it was automatic. So it is a really tricky thing to balance extreme ownership of my choices while also saying that I couldn't just flick a switch and suddenly not be an addict anymore. It was going to take a lot of time. It was going to take a lot of accountability.
I think in some ways, it like any addiction, it's generally, except for maybe some really strong drugs, where you're instantly hooked. I think it does. You get that, as you mentioned, that thrill, that dopamine and all that, and it builds each time. And so now to get to the healthy habit, you have to find those habits to replace that high, that feeling that you were getting from what you were doing. So, to appreciate the time playing with your boys, or, having intimate relationships with your wife, and truly believing in that, taking walks outside to get your body, exhausted to the point that you're not looking for something else. I think, it would be interesting to hear some of the things that you did, reflecting back on becoming healthier in your habits, that replaced those things that were not.
So part of what you're describing has actually not been the case for me, although it definitely can be a place for a lot of folks, where there is like maybe not one-to-one, but there's kind of an exchange, not necessarily in a bad way, but kind of an exchange of pouring my time and energy into this thing that's destructive, and now I'm pouring it into this other thing. Now, it very often it is destructive. We call it switching horses. We're now, okay, I'm no longer a coke addict, and now I'm, a thrill seeker in very dangerous ways, or I'm a workaholic instead of an alcoholic, right? We see a lot of that. And I can definitely, I can struggle with that. I got to be really careful about games on my phone. I had to take a Pinochle game off my phone. I love Pinochle, but because I was like, I just would just play
you
it
have an
too much.
addictive behavior, right?
Absolutely. So there really isn't an area where it's like, okay, now I pour that time and energy, or I get that dopamine hit, or that kind of thing. But what it is, that I think you're definitely hitting on is, I can't white knuckle and just stop doing the bad stuff and just leave it as a vacuum. I have to fill myself with a healthy infrastructure, with healthy things that I'm doing. And it's going to look different for every person, but if I'm, if I'm tempted to look at pornography, it's not enough for me to like, okay, I'm going to put my phone in a different room and I'm not going to think about it. It's like, don't think about the purple elephant, right? It's like, well, no, like, okay, I need to make a phone call, or I'm going to go for a walk around the neighborhood, or I'm going to, go, like, there's lots of different things that I could do, but I need to do something and replace it with a constructive activity. And making a phone call, I mean, I didn't just randomly throw that in. That's probably the most effective tool that I learned in recovery, is making a phone call. Especially, ideally, it's a phone call to somebody else in the trenches. Now, maybe they're 10 years of sobriety and they're a really healthy person, but they understand what it is to be in those trenches, right? They understand what it is to be fiending at night and wanting so bad to use or to act out or to rage or to whatever. They understand that, and they understand how to give good feedback and ask tough questions. It's not just calling a friend or my mom or my buddy from the Bible study. Like, that's better than nothing. But ideally, it's somebody that knows how to sniff out the BS, that knows how to ask those tough questions. They know my story, they know my triggers, they know where I'm coming from, and they can give me, if needed, the harsh feedback that I might need in that moment. Or maybe they just listen. Maybe there is no feedback necessary. One of the best things that comes from a phone call is honestly not usually the advice that I get or the questions that I get asked, although that's huge. It teaches me to shut up and listen. Because in recovery, I get current, I put it out there in a phone call, or if it's at a meeting, I do it at a meeting. And then when I'm done, I say, I'm open to questions, comments, feedback. And then you have permission to ask whatever questions you want to ask, say whatever you want to say. And I'm not permitted to speak unless you ask me a question. And that's a hard thing to learn, especially for somebody like myself that was used to working the room and getting my way. It's an incredible skill that I'm very thankful for.
Yeah. I often teach in my to be more engaging as a speaker is you've got to be a good listener. You have to actively listen. And a lot of speakers that are comfortable speaking are talkers, and they talk, and you can't hear people's pain and problem if you're talking all the time. So you have to be that listener. But I was wondering, you talked about what you did, but you're a partner with your wife.
Yep.
So, what did she have to go through to heal herself, to forgive you, to really, I mean, this is a rebuilding of a trust wall that, or maybe taking down the wall that she built up.
Yep. I mean, I say all the time, like, if she'll share in her testimony, if I'm talking to guys, if we're talking to somebody, like, God didn't fix our marriage. Our marriage, we never got divorced. But I mean, God like stripped it down, and then like we rebuilt a new marriage. Like if somebody asks how long I've been married, I'll give them our anniversary date, and then I'll tell them how long we've been in recovery. Because how long we've been married is one thing, but how long we've been moving towards healthy living is a very different thing, right? So what she did first and foremost was recognize, and this is such a crucial piece, recognize that she needed to do something.
Yeah.
It's an extremely common thing, and she sees it all the time. She works with women with sexual betrayal trauma, that somebody might go, hey, I want my husband to get fixed. I want him to go get help. But like, I didn't cheat on us. I didn't cause this problem. Why do I need to go to a group or go to a therapist or do homework or work on stuff? It's not my problem. I didn't cause this. And she's always, going to remind her, like, it's not about fairness. You didn't cause the problem, but you got wounded. So if you have an opportunity to go to a hospital, you should go seek healing. So Carrie, she got into recovery shortly after I did. She started attending in July of 2016 for sexual betrayal trauma. So the group called Partners in Process, and specifically for spouses that have suffered that sexual betrayal trauma, because it is an absolutely key piece to this. If she had not done that, maybe we'd still be together. If I stopped doing all the crap, maybe, but there would have been, and we see many examples of this, the marriage kind of gets frozen in time. The spouse, the betrayed partner, is always the betrayed partner. They're forever going to be that shell of themselves. And the marriage is always going to be kind of a shell of itself, instead of this new creation that has learned, as I've been incredibly blessed to be a part of this new marriage, where we've learned what it is to interact with each other in a healthy way. We've learned how to communicate in a healthy way, how to just be, not perfect, but be healthy with each other. And yeah, the relearning trust, or learning, learning in the first place, learning what it is to trust, which is really two parts for her. It was trusting, not because I said different, but because I did different, believable behavior. But also, Carrie had, I would almost a miraculously large amount of trust in the program. She knew. So like, I worked with my mentor, Rick, and his wife, Patty, who led the women's group. She was Carrie's mentor. So Carrie knew that there was Rick, but there were also many other men that had, they had serious, healthy living, serious amount of sobriety, that they were deeply involved in my life. They were deeply involved in my accountability. And if she needed to know something, if I crossed a line, or if there was something, she would know about it, but she wasn't my accountability partner. She wasn't the one assigned to fix me. She wasn't, that she trusted the program. She trusted that process, which is just it's a whole other level to this, but it's been an amazing experience.
Yeah. So what are 3 pieces of advice? Our time's flown by, and thank you for sharing so much. I think it's really important for people to hear. But what are 2 or 3 pieces of advice you'd share to help the audience get to building healthy habits of, individually, as a couple, as a family? It doesn't do you any good to try to fix you if you don't have the support and love of those around you. And those around you, as you just demonstrated, need the support and love of others that have been through, done that, so they have someone to talk to that, maybe that first discussion isn't with you, to really check their feelings and make sure that how they say something is going to be helpful and not hurtful or regretful. So, what would be a couple pieces of advice you'd share with the audience?
The 3 things that stand out to me, I'll list them off and I'll expand on them a little bit. So not in a particular order, but number 1, recognize your stakes. If nothing in whatever area is concerning to you, whether it's your whole life or a specific issue or addiction or destructive habit, if nothing improves there and time goes on, what are you afraid of happening?
Yeah.
Because again, I feel like I'm spoiled sometimes because the stakes were so high, as crazy as that sounds, because there was no part of me that could lie and be like, oh, it'll all be fine. Like, I knew that it was not going to be fine. So, if somebody struggles with snacking a little bit too much at night, or cheating on their taxes a little bit, or they might be able to lie to themselves. I'm like, it's not going to be a big deal, or I get a little bit too angry. But so recognize, if that doesn't improve, newsflash, it will get worse. It will not stay static. Right. So if it doesn't improve, what are you afraid of happening? Ask yourself that, and then honestly answer that. And I would say, write it down. Don't say it in your head, write it down, or say it to a close friend or an accountability partner, coach. Number 2, again, this is not a countdown, but the second thing, and this loops into, the person maybe that you're talking to about that first one, is find people in your life who have the type of life that you want.
Yeah.
If you need recovery, find somebody that has experienced true transformative healing. Not just somebody that's, willing to listen. Like, that's a good start, but ideally somebody that has experienced some of what you experienced and they've come out the other side. If you're going through grief, find somebody that's gone through that grief. If you're, whatever you're dealing with, find somebody that has dealt with some version of that issue and has the type of healing or the type of life that you would want for yourself. And then as much as you can, embrace a relationship with that person.
Yeah.
And I guess part of that I'll as kind of a 2B to that part. If you're looking for a group, whether like a recovery group especially, or a support group, be willing to try a couple different groups. Like go 2 to 3 times probably to a group before you decide to leave it. But be willing to try it. There's lots of different types of groups out there. They're not all created equal. They're led by different people. They have different types of people in them. They have different type of beliefs. Like I love and have huge respect for recovery groups. I've also been to recovery groups that were very shallow, very surfacey. I've been to some groups that might even be damaging. So don't just write it off because you went to one and now you know. But recognize the stakes and seek out somebody that has a life that you want.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for being such a great guest. And as always, I remind everyone that I'm going to be sharing this screen. If you're just listening, you should quick run a paper and pencil. You should have been taking notes along the way if this is a topic that really resonates with you. But if you are watching, you can get a screenshot. As always, I will have all this information on my YouTube channel, Vicki Noethling. So please subscribe, as well as my findyourleadershipconfidence.com in the show notes. For those that are just listening, the website is Prodigals of Alaska. Again, Prodigals of Alaska. On LinkedIn, you can search him by his name, Logan Hufford. Facebook is Lucky number 13, and Instagram is no dot longer dot insta in bondage. So just no period longer period in period bondage. I can't talk today. So the Instagram is where he spends most of the time, but I will let him talk to you about his call to action today, things that you might find on that website, and anything, any area in the social media platforms that really are where he spends the most time, so that you can get the most benefit of connecting with him there. So I will turn it over to you, Logan, to share that information.
Yeah, thanks, Vicki. So yeah, again, my time and energy is primarily poured into Instagram as in terms of a platform for putting content out there, reaching and connecting with folks. A lot of my stuff is going to talk about sexual addiction, as we've talked about for the last 30, 40 minutes. 95% of it is directly applicable for any destructive habit. Maybe the stakes are different. Maybe the stigmas are different. What it takes to work on things is mostly going to be the same. And it's also not exclusively for the addict. If you are a loved one of an addict, if you are a loved one of somebody who has destructive tendencies, or maybe you're a pastor, you're a coach, you're a leader, you're somebody who thankfully doesn't struggle with this, but you would like to better understand it, because I can promise you this is an issue that is not very well understood. Sexual addiction, recovery, and sexual betrayal trauma as well. So I get into all of that, and I do my best to put a lot of good content out there, because there's a need for it. If you don't have an Instagram, you can certainly, you can reach out via Facebook. My Facebook is not geared towards recovery. It's my personal Facebook, but you're more than welcome to add me or shoot me a message if you don't have an Instagram, or same thing with LinkedIn. You can reach out to me there. If worse come to worse, if you don't have any social media, you can reach out to me through the Prodigals of Alaska website. And then that one also does have some resources on it. They're resources, they're tools. They're not going to fix you by themselves, but there's some good reading lists of recommended books for sexual addiction, as well as sexual betrayal trauma. My contact info is on there. And then it is also geared towards Alaska. So there's like meeting availability times and stuff. But there's also some really cool tools. I'll just spend like 10 seconds. Thinking errors and tactics to avoid change. These are a list of, and I'm going to be doing a series on Instagram going over some of these. Literally ways that an addict, ways that a criminal, because that's the study was actually from studying hundreds of criminals in the judicial system, and going deep on all these unhealthy ways of thinking. So then it's a sobering thing to go into group and go, I struggle with all this stuff, or, I struggle with almost all these things. But how an addict thinks, how an unhealthy person to that level thinks, how they operate. So thinking errors and tactics to avoid change are really good. That was more than 10 seconds. The relapse cycle is another one that I'll point out. Again, it's a really good way to understand what it is to be an addiction, whether you struggle or you would just want to better understand what it looks like to go through that cycle. Because it absolutely, it's insane and it doesn't make logical sense. But once I can better understand it, I can either better work on it if it's myself, or I can better respond to somebody if I have a loved one that's struggling with that. But lastly, I'll just full circle. Please, check out that Instagram. I think you will find a lot of beneficial content in there. And if you have a question, I don't do this for a living, but this is my life. So if you want to reach out, if you have a question or you want to talk about resources in your area and you're kind of lost as to like where to start, shoot me a message. Let me know and we can talk through that.
Awesome.
Can I cheat and give a third tip?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I realized I gave 1 and then 2A, 2B, but so here's a 3. Yeah. So if you haven't already been made aware by some of my verbiage, I love Jocko Willink. I love extreme ownership. I love incorporating non-recovery materials into recovery, because to me, that's what it's all about. Is healthy living is healthy living, right? So a third piece to anyone that is listening, anyone that wants to grow from this conversation, focus on what you can control. And this is especially true if you're an addict, right? Or in a destructive lifestyle. And it's especially true if you are close to somebody. Yeah. My wife needed to learn that she couldn't control me. She also needed to learn that I wasn't doing these things because of her. And yet she had absolute choices for her to make. She was at forks in the road, even though she might not have realized it, right? And of course, I had a host of things that I needed to work on. I could blame the porn industry. I could blame my upbringing or blame my brain or whatever. But at the end of the day, I made my choices, right?
Yeah.
So just focusing on what can I control, and what are those things that I have direct influence over, and not focusing on all those other things out there. It should be common sense, but it's not. We as humans tend to spend a lot of time blaming and focusing on other people and what they're doing wrong. It's like, well, what can I do better?
Yeah, absolutely. That accountability. Well, it's been wonderful chatting with you. Again, thanks for sharing your story and really imparting a lot of experience and insight as to how we can start to build healthy habits. And healthy habits aren't only just what we eat, what we put into our body, how we exercise. There's a whole lot of other things that make us be able to have a better, more fulfilling life for ourselves and for those around that love us and that we love. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on, Vicki. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. And as always, I remind everyone that life is a journey and it is up to you to enjoy the ride. This is Vicki Noethling signing off.
Thank you for tuning into the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling, where we share impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Remember to visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast.